Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Andy Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where I feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And today's episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, and implement processes and procedures so companies can grow and thrive. And today's guest is Katie McConnell Olson. Hi, Katie.
Hello.
Great to have you on this podcast. We're going to have an amazing conversation today. And before we get started, and I want to give a big shout out to Jeff, who introduced us. And I'm going to have, I did a podcast with him and so did you. And we are going to have, I'm going to make sure that I include the show notes. I mean, basically the link to the podcast that we did together in the show notes so people can listen to it, because Jeff is such an amazing connector and you should actually log in and basically go to his podcast and listen to more episodes. He's a great podcaster and great episodes. And we can also include the episode that he did with you. So if people want to know more, they can listen to that one as well.
Well, thanks. Yes, he knows everybody. Super connector. So
Absolutely.
If you're listening, you should know him too.
That's right. Exactly. That's exactly right. Well, Katie, so you are the founders and CEO of GrowthWise Search Partners, and we're going to talk all about what that is. You are an actual a CPA. You have by trade. I mean, you have the license as a CPA, and you came from the consulting world, from the CPA world, and you saw that basically there is something missing in terms of the hiring scene and how this is being done, and you decided to do something about it, which is incredible because it really reminds me of my story of why I started my company, because I also came from the consulting world and I saw that there was this missing link in terms of people documenting the processes and procedures was just not happening. We can advise them to do that, but it just didn't happen. So then I found that niche and been doing it now for over a decade on that particular area. So it seems to me there is a lot of similarities, and we also work with similar industries, etc. But I'm interested to find out more about you and how this whole idea came about, and what did you see that was lacking, and how did you remedy it?
Yeah, great question. It's really interesting because as I kind of sit on both sides. I came from the compliance side, thrust into the entrepreneurial world, like most of us are, that say, hey, I have this idea and I have this passion for how to bring it to market, but I really have no idea how to processitize this. So I've definitely learned a lot of those lessons along the way, which I know we'll talk about. So to back up a little bit, how I saw the idea. So I came from the world of accounting. I was on the audit side, so not a tax person, but out and about with companies where I see the inner workings of how companies operate. And one of the things that all companies have in common that they need to grow is people, right? Human capital. Even if you're a machine shop that mostly generates product with machine, you still need human capital. So it's something that all businesses have in common. And it's probably, in addition to being the number one, line item on your P&L as far as expenses go, the one that people complain about the most, right? The least understood. And so I saw, companies have this need for human capital, for hiring, and I'm watching breakdowns happen, probably similarly to how, you saw a need. It's going, okay, something's breaking in the system and how do we fix it? And the input to fix it is not necessarily just more resumes, which is really how the traditional recruiting industry works, is send more bodies through the funnel or burn them and turn them, as you've probably heard in the industry. And I said, there's got to be a better way to do this. So let's look at the process of how it's done, refine a really good process for how hiring works that adds value at every single stage and has a pricing model that doesn't incentivize a turn them and burn them kind of approach. And insert, marrying my public accounting background with the search world to offer services to accounting firm clients, which is where I started in this business, and then moved into full entrepreneurship on my own with a different pricing model that marries up that value and process.
Interesting. So let's talk about it, like, in terms of it, because your firm is different, and we're going to talk about, for our listeners, we're going to build a process or best practices on how to hire. I want to hear about that and why processes are so important. But I really want to understand, what do you see as not working in the recruitment world today, or with traditional companies that you decided to remedy, whether it's the pricing model or the approach? So let's start with the approach. What do you feel are the most common mistakes or things that are being done that are actually not the greatest fit for entrepreneurs that are being done by recruitment companies?
Sure. I think one of the first things is really not understanding and doing the framework upfront. Before we started this podcast, we were talking about mutual construction clients, right? They start with a blueprint and a foundation. You would not build a hospital without a blueprint, a set of plans, and then pouring the foundation before you start. However, oftentimes I see with companies that they'll kind of start in the middle of the hiring process without asking the questions, simply foundationally, why do we need this hire? A hire is a business tool used to solve a business problem, right? Or further your business mission. So why are we hiring somebody? Let's really get an understanding of what that reason is and clearly define as part of that, what do we want our outcomes to be? What does success look like in this role? How do I know when I put my head on my pillow at night that this person is doing a good job? And how do I translate that to this candidate in the interview process so we can line up whether or not we're aligned on whether this person can be successful? So really laying the foundations and processitizing how you go about exploring that is going to be the number one mistake I think companies make. And it's sort of aided and abated by traditional recruiting agencies that will send you an email with a resume. I'm sure you've been on the receiving end of, oh, hi, I have a great candidate for you that would be a great fit for you. And I personally find that offensive. GrowthWise doesn't operate that way. I'm not going to send you a resume for a candidate and claim that they're a great fit. I don't know anything about your business. How do I know if they're going to be a fit or not? Just because, their job title is similar to some of the people that you already employ. So not our model. Another way that we're doing things a little bit differently. We really want to understand first, what's your business reason for making this hire? What are your objectives? How much are we paying? A lot of times we see, and we call it, let the tail wag the dog. Well, we've got this great candidate, and now all of a sudden we're backing into how much that salary should be, rather than laying those foundations and saying, okay, here's our budget. Here's the value of this role for what this commands according to the market and the ROI that it's going to generate for the company. So this is what we're willing to pay. Here's what success looks like. And now here's that profile of what we're trying to accomplish. Now let's go execute on the search.
Absolutely. That makes total sense. Now, you mentioned the pricing model that is different. So what pricing model do you use that is different?
So we use one of two pricing models that are either value-based under time and materials or upfront retainer, like a traditional services firm. So if we're doing all the hiring for a company, we are the talent department. They're paying a flat fee every month for us, and that's the fee. There's no additional fees every time we make a hire. That's the fee. The other model is a time and materials model. So we're matching up the hours that we put in and the value that we provide our client against the fee that we charge them. So very much like a lawyer or a CPA firm would charge. What we don't do is sell you a resume and then charge you a big fat fee if you make a hire, but not charge you if you don't make a hire. We're not in the business of trafficking resumes to businesses and selling them fees for, selling humans to companies. Not how we operate.
Understood. Okay. All right. So now let's talk about, the importance of having a good infrastructure and having good processes in place when we onboard, like in the hiring process, right? So when you go into companies that do have processes and procedures as opposed to companies that do not, what is the real difference? Like, how does that really affect hiring?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple things. Expediency, and expediency. The market is crazy, right? After COVID, it was like the whole market got turned upside down and shook. It's still a candidate's market. And with the rising salaries everywhere, especially for small businesses, it's tough to compete. We've seen that sort of get shooken up again and popcorned in certain markets. It's fascinating, but it continues to be really interesting. Candidates are moving fast. So if you don't have a process, oftentimes you're going, well, I don't really know what to do next. We've brought a candidate in, or they've been through a first interview. I don't really know what to do. We may lose out on candidates because of not knowing exactly how to move somebody through your hiring funnel, through your cycle, and having to, well, let's have a meeting about it. Well, let's circle the wagons and have another conversation about what we want to do.
So we're talking about the hiring process itself, right? Not
Exactly.
processes in general in the company.
Right. I'm talking about, knowing and having a template for, hey, when someone comes in, this is what it looks like. We do a pre-screen, we do a phone screen, there's a 2-interview or a 3-interview process. Maybe there's a culture mapping that happens somewhere in there. We know what that looks like. We know what the steps look like. We kind of know what the turnaround time on that is. So there isn't a lot of delay in trying to figure out what do we want to do next. I think that's one of the number one challenges I see with small businesses is they don't really have a good process for how to move people through. So even if they have a potentially strong candidate, there's a lot of time delay in just figuring out how to move them through the process and make it an effective process.
Mm-hmm. That's right, because that can be the make break, and also, it's a reflection of your company, of the company on the candidates, right? Especially when you're saying this is a candidate market. So if we do not come across organized, or we do not come across as, we respond in a timely manner, or we do not use good communication in terms of acknowledging people, in terms of even if they're not a good fit, you got to respond to them in a timely manner because they might know somebody that can be a good fit, right? So it's 100%. Definitely a reflection on the company. And it also creates at a time, an extra time that we don't usually have. If we want to hire somebody, we don't want to create that internal confusion. So I agree with you. Do you have any particular hiring process that you found that is successful that you can share with the listeners?
Of course, it's what we do. Yeah, we always start, I'll kind of walk you soup to nuts through what my perfect hiring process looks like. And of course, this is going to be different for every company. What I'm about to tell you is pretty boilerplate, so it would have to be, tweaked for your specific needs. First of all, what is called a pre-screen. And I'm starting at the stage that the candidate has already been sourced. Whether they applied, whether we found them, let's pretend that we're ready to have an initial conversation. We pre-screen. We're looking for, are we aligned on salary? If it's an in-office role, for example, are you able to come into the office or travel or work a swing shift, whatever those sort of deal breakers are, we want to get that out of the way right off the bat and make sure that we're aligned. If we're not, it's not a fit and the rest doesn't even matter, right? If there's a big deal breaker. From there, we move into what we call a phone screen, but that can also be a Zoom meeting or kind of an initial conversation where we're really taking a bit more of a deeper dive into the person's background, career history. We're going to revisit that salary conversation. We're going to talk about, what the career motivations are, where they want to be, and maybe some of the other technical questions that we're looking for. We're looking for kind of mutual alignments or things that are just really going to be malaligned and not be a fit. Now, presuming that they pass that piece of things, we might have a culture mapping. I'm a big fan personally of culture mapping, especially in small businesses. If you're working directly with the CEO, for better or for worse, we all know this. And if you're a founder and you're listening to this, you got things that make you have your superpowers, and then you've got your kryptonites. And you have to surround yourself with people that can work with that, because you're not going to change and turn yourself inside out just to make other people successful. So for better or for worse, we need to have people that can tolerate you, for lack of a better word. I'm kidding, but work really well with you as a founder. So I'm a huge proponent of that. Let's make sure we know what we're getting into, so you know how to best show up as a leader, and you know whether or not you're oil and water with somebody. That may be where we do a culture mapping. Then we're going to move into the actual in-person interview process. Now, again, that might be a Zoom interview or it could be an in-person. That's really where we've covered all the salary, the questions, the deal breakers. We've kind of built that relationship. Now we're really getting into the meat and potatoes of that technical interview. Again, that's where process is really important. We want to be prepared and have some questions lined up that we already know. This is what I need to know. I'm looking for how easily this person will plug into what I'm looking for. Be that prior experience, cognitive ability, raw smarts and grit, whatever it is that I know success looks like this. This is my opportunity. How do those things fit together? Thereafter, after that process, we move to a verbal offer, a paperwork offer to generate an offer letter and, make sure that we're crossing our I's, dotting our T's. You get my drift. And then moving through pre-onboarding, first day email, and then a successful onboard, which, by the way, should not end with first day paperwork and should be a very documented and integrated process of, a 1 day check-in, a 1 week check-in, a 30, a 60, a 90, where we're measuring this is what success looks like at this milestone against where you are in your career development. So, successful onboarding is not an I-9 form.
It is not. I completely agree with you. And, we document the processes and procedures for companies in all areas. One of our most popular one that companies come to us is to document their onboarding. And obviously the onboarding includes training. So we need to, let's say, for instance, we're onboarding a new salesperson as an example. Or we are onboarding a new paralegal. We just did a great project with a law firm. So we're onboarding a new paralegal. So yes, the first day, of course you do the forms. Hopefully you have it some kind of an automated system within, one of the HR, capital management, the human resources or personnel management. And, you can do the forms, etc. And it's a good, smooth onboarding. But part of the onboarding, it is the introduction to the company. Like, for instance, when I onboard my own team members, they go through a series of videos that I created about explaining my core values, explaining about the companies, explaining about the history of the company, explaining about the org chart, explaining what is expected, what's my management style, etc. So they know it, right? And they don't just have to hear it once, they can repeat it, they can listen to the videos as many times as they want. So it's the welcome to the company, but also the training. So let's take a look at the paralegal, for instance. We are onboarding a new paralegal. We created like a series of step-by-step for the first 30 days, the first 60 days, and the first 90 days, which also include training on the systems, training on the job description, training on what they need to do. And it's basically get them step-by-step to learn and to be successful. And we have success, basically core competencies that they have to meet and measure the success against it, so they know that when to do it or not. And as a matter of fact, I actually even recorded a whole podcast about it. So I agree with you, Katie. You have to have it documented because it costs so much in terms of not just the money investment, it's the time, the energy, even the enthusiasm. Yes, we found somebody, and then they leave after 2 weeks and it's so deflating. It's like, oh, I will never be able to train anybody, right? But a key to retention is how you actually onboard a new staff member. And I agree with you that it is extremely, extremely important. So
half of success, this is a truth bomb, half of the success is up to you with a hire. And the other half of it is, did we get the right person? Do they have the aptitude, attitude, and the skills to do the job? 50% of the success is what happens after they get in the door, which, let me tell you something, as a hiring professional, that's terrifying because our job is to bring you the people. And the other half of the job, we leave it at the door, and it's your job as the founder, the business owner, to generate that success. So because we know that, another reason why we're different is that we do ask about the onboarding roadmap, and we do help the client with those resources, because we know that half of the success is what happens after we leave them at the doorstep and you take over and make sure that you're, documenting things, helping set them up for success. Sometimes people are just not the right people. I get that. And half of it is making sure that they understand. I can't tell you how many times people call me and say, well, we need to replace our accounting manager. Okay, what's going on? Well, they're not doing this, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. Okay, do they know that? Have you had the conversation? They're calling me from the broom closet. They don't know I'm having this conversation right now. That's where we need to start. What's your onboarding process? What's your measuring stick? So important. Can't highlight that enough.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then it also takes the guesswork, because if you know that you have a true proven onboarding process and you follow it every single time, then most likely you will have success 80-90% of the time, and there will be the 10-20% that will not stick. That happens everywhere. I mean, we can't, it will be like so unrealistic to think that 100% of the candidates are going to stick. But if you actually use good recruitment like you described, or use your company and we get good high quality candidates, and you have a good process of onboarding them, then you know that you did everything that you can. And then you go, okay, fine, next one. But I think it will really reduce the chances to maybe 5% that do not stick around, right? So it just your odds are so much better for retention. I completely agree with you. And it goes, yeah.
You made me think about closing the hiring cycle, and a process for offboarding as well, which, let's not discount that as part of the process. We do a lot of exit interviews, which it's a bummer when somebody exits sometimes. And it's one of my favorite things to do, because we get so much good information out of an exit interview. So I really recommend that as part of your hiring process as well, is to have that offboarding process of what kind of information can we gather. Let's not send them an email. I don't want to see a survey. I want to see a conversation, a phone call, a Zoom. Tell me what we did well. Tell me what we didn't. What would we have to change in order for this outcome to have been different? Would you still recommend your friends to work here? And then what you do with that information is so important in helping continue to create process and sustainability in your business so that you can get better.
I agree with you 100%. And, and I have clients that are also doing stay interviews, right? You don't have to wait for the exit interview to ask those questions. I mean, I think it's good measure. It's best practice to actually do it throughout. Hey, let's have a stay interview, meaning once a year, every 6 months, ask those questions, so you can have, you always have your hand on the pulse, like, where are we? How are we doing? Is this a good fit? What are you thinking? And if you have a good culture, then your employees are actually going to be open and talk about it.
Yeah, there's so much there with all of that. It can definitely feel really overwhelming for a smaller mid-sized business. Oh my gosh, I already have to, generate revenue and keep my clients and my customers happy. And now I have this whole other thing, this whole other hat that I have to wear as well. And it's definitely not an easy task.
It's not, but it's needed. It's necessary. Just like you're not going to dream to run a business without having having sales, basically without selling. Human capital, I mean, like you said, it's the big number one expense. If this is your number one expense, aren't you going to spend more time on it? I mean, that, it's kind of like, you can go chase the next client and the next client, but honestly, if you have a good culture and you take care of your employees and you hire right, that sells by itself, because then you hire people that are actually represent your culture, and then clients are going to be happy, and you're going to have referrals, and people are going to be happy. So when you're living in a happy environment, you can then put your attention on growth and scaling, as opposed to on, fighting or, arguing with each other or being frustrated. So it's really thinking about the big picture. And sometimes we need to do, as business owners, things that we don't really want, or we feel like we're not good enough. But that's part of being a business owner. It's part of the responsibility.
Going back to building those foundations, it's interesting because some clients that that aren't a good fit for us, when we tell them, well, we're going to spend a couple of hours getting to know your company culture. We're going to, we want a Zoom tour or a tour of your office if we're not there physically. We want to kind of see the space, feel the vibe. We want to understand your benefits. We want to ask you all these questions. And some clients that aren't a fit for us will say, well, that's ridiculous. Can you just start sending me resumes? I just need resumes. No, because an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So they say, let's invest those 3-4 hours up front for sustainable outcomes. It's going to take you more than 3 or 4 hours to redo this in 6 months if it all blows up in your face. So if you're not willing to build a solid foundation, we're not going to be a good fit, because we always start with that. We want to really understand your pain points so we can help you solve your business problems.
100%. I agree with you. Katie, you're such an expert in this area. If our listeners want to reach out to you and ask you questions or engage with your company, what's the best way to reach out to you?
LinkedIn is a great place to find us. We are very active on LinkedIn as a team of recruiters, as you can imagine. You can find us at GrowthWise Search Partners on our LinkedIn page. You can find me, Katie McConnell Olson, or by way of GrowthWise Search Partners, which can also get you plugged in with our website. So we're very available. We love to hear from you. And it's my favorite thing to engage with growing companies about talent challenges and how we can solve business problems.
Fantastic. And I'm sure, and I know that you do it very well, just by your knowledge alone and what you know and what differentiates you. So thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and inspiring our listeners to do better, be better. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.